Liberty's bark shattered the October morning silence like gunfire, her powerful German Shepherd frame rigid with an urgency that made Samuel Mackenzie's weathered hands freeze around his coffee mug. In 30 years of mountain solitude, he'd never heard his canine companion make that sound, part warning, part terror, all primal instinct screaming danger. The 9-year-old former bomb detection dog stood sentinel before the ancient American chestnut tree. Hackles bristled like steel wool, amber eyes fixed on something that made her military training surge to the surface. This wasn't the casual alert of spotting wildlife. This was combat readiness. Sam set down his mug with trembling fingers, studying the grotesque bulge protruding from the 400-year-old trunk like a tumor swollen with secrets. The bark had split in jagged lines, weeping dark sap that caught the morning light like dried blood. "Easy, girl," he whispered, but Liberty's growl deepened to a bone-rattling frequency that spoke of death long buried. Some secrets, Sam realized with growing dread, the mountains never meant to keep. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Samuel "Sam" Mackenzie had learned to trust silence. For 30 years it had been his sanctuary in these Tennessee mountains, a balm for wounds that civilian doctors couldn't heal and veteran hospitals couldn't understand. At 72, his weathered frame still carried the ramrod posture of a man who'd handled war dogs in the jungles of Vietnam, though silver now threaded through his dark beard and crow's feet mapped decades of mountain sun around pale blue eyes. The cabin he'd built with his own hands squatted against the mountainside like it had grown there, constructed from local timber and chinked with determination. Solar panels gleamed on the south-facing roof, his one concession to modern convenience. Inside lay the sparse life of a man who'd learned that possessions couldn't fill the hollow spaces grief carved in a soul. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by handmade furniture and shelves lined with books he'd read countless times. Military medals gathered dust in a wooden box he never opened. Liberty emerged from beneath the porch steps, her red gold coat dulled with age, but her amber eyes still sharp with intelligence. The German Shepherd had arrived 3 years ago through the Veterans Administration's Canine Adoption Program. A bomb detection specialist retired after her handler, Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, stepped on an IED outside Kandahar. The explosion that killed Jake had shattered more than metal and flesh. It had broken Liberty's spirit, leaving her with night terrors and an inability to trust. Sam understood broken spirits. His own had cracked like kindling the night Margaret and 8-year-old Tommy died in the house fire he'd caused. A cigarette left burning on the kitchen table while he dozed in his recliner, exhausted from another double shift at the lumber mill. He'd awakened to smoke and screams, fought through flames to reach their bedroom, but the roof collapsed before he could pull them free. The investigators called it accidental. Sam called it murder, his own family's blood on his hands. The settlement money sat untouched in a Knoxville bank account, blood money he couldn't spend on himself. Instead, he'd bought these 60 acres of mountain wilderness and built a fortress of solitude where guilt could age like whiskey, becoming something bearable if never fully palatable. Liberty had found him during her darkest hour, and somehow they'd found healing together. Two soldiers sharing the same foxhole against memories that attacked without warning. She slept across his doorway, alert to sounds that might trigger his nightmares. He spoke to her in the gentle tones his canine training had taught him, patient with her fears because he understood them. This morning routine had become sacred ritual. Coffee on the porch at dawn, Liberty's patrol of their perimeter, then the day's work of splitting wood and maintaining their small slice of peace. The mountains provided everything they needed, clean water from a spring, game for the table, and blessed silence that asked no questions about the past. But today, Liberty's behavior shattered that sacred peace. Her military bearing had returned, every muscle taut with purpose. as she faced the ancient chestnut tree that dominated their eastern ridge. Something in that tree had awakened the soldier she'd tried to forget. Sam approached the ancient chestnut with the careful steps of a man who'd learned that the ground beneath your feet could explode without warning. Liberty maintained her rigid stance 20 feet back, every line of her body screaming alerts he'd seen in the field when she'd detected explosives. But this wasn't Afghanistan, and the enemy here had been buried far longer than any roadside bomb. The tree loomed before them like a cathedral pillar, its massive trunk easily 8 feet in diameter. 4 centuries of Tennessee weather had carved deep furrows in its bark, but the grotesque swelling on the eastern face was unnatural, a bulge the size of a coffin that stretched the ancient wood until fissures had opened like wounds. Dark sap wept from these cracks, staining the bark in patterns that reminded Sam uncomfortably of dried blood. "What's got you spooked, girl?" he murmured, but Liberty's amber eyes never wavered from the tree. Her nose worked the air, processing scents his human senses couldn't detect. In Afghanistan, that nose had saved dozens of lives by detecting trace explosives. Now it was telling her something that made her hackles rise like porcupine quills. Sam pulled his grandfather's folding knife from his pocket, its bone handle worn smooth by 4 generations of Mackenzie hands. The blade, though aged, still held a keen edge. He'd maintained it religiously, old habits from military service where your gear meant the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. The first careful cut into the swollen bark released an odor that made Sam step back involuntarily. Not the clean scent of pine resin or the earthy smell of healthy wood, but something organic and wrong, like opening a root cellar that had been sealed too long. Liberty whined, a sound he'd never heard from her before, high and distressed. "Easy, easy," Sam soothed, though his own hands trembled as he worked the knife deeper. And the wood felt wrong under the blade, softer than it should be, almost spongy in places. Decades of growth around whatever lay inside had created a cavity, and his headlamp beam penetrated only a few inches before disappearing into darkness. The second cut revealed fabric. Faded blue denim, so deteriorated it crumbled at his touch, but unmistakably the remains of clothing. Sam's breath caught in his throat. Someone had been sealed inside this tree, and the wood had grown around them like living flesh healing over a splinter. With growing dread, he widened the opening. More fabric emerged, what had once been a flannel shirt in a red and black pattern that sent ice through his veins. He knew that pattern, had seen it countless times draped over a kitchen chair, hanging in a closet, wrapped around shoulders on cold mountain mornings. Billy. His little brother Billy had worn a shirt exactly like this the day he'd stormed out of the family home 35 years ago, shouting words that still echoed in Sam's memory. "You'll be sorry, Sam. When you find out the truth about that wife of yours, you'll be sorry you didn't listen." Sam had dismissed it as jealousy. Margaret was beautiful, young, everything Billy wasn't sophisticated enough to understand. The 20-year-old had always been impulsive, prone to dramatic gestures and wild accusations. When he'd disappeared the next day, Sam assumed he'd run off to prove some point, maybe join the circus or hitchhike to California like he'd always threatened. But Billy had never been one to abandon family for long. Even in his wildest phases, he'd always come home for Christmas, for birthdays, for the moments that mattered. 35 years of silence wasn't dramatic gesture, it was death. Sam's trembling fingers found more fabric, and beneath it, something hard and rectangular. A wallet, its leather darkened with age and moisture but still intact. The bills inside had fused into an unreadable mass, but in the clear plastic window, a driver's license remained partially legible. William Henderson, not Mackenzie, Henderson. Billy had changed his name, had been trying to build a new life away from whatever had driven him from home. The birth date was right, March 15, 1954. The photograph, though water-damaged and faded, showed the same stubborn jaw, the same pale blue eyes that Sam saw in his own mirror. "Jesus Christ, Billy," Sam whispered, his voice breaking. "What happened to you?" Liberty's whine grew more insistent, and Sam realized she was trying to warn him of something else. The fabric around Billy's remains was arranged too carefully, too deliberately. This wasn't the result of an accident or natural death. Someone had placed his brother here, had used the tree's growth to create a living tomb. As understanding crashed over him like a cold wave, Sam's hands began to shake uncontrollably. Margaret had known about this tree's secrets. She'd mentioned it dozens of times during their marriage, always with that strange smile, talking about how old trees held memories, how they kept the past safe. Billy had tried to warn him about something the day he disappeared, and now Sam was staring at the proof that his little brother had died trying to protect him from a truth he'd been too blind to see. Sam spent the next 2 days methodically excavating his brother's remains with the precision his military training had drilled into him. Each artifact he recovered felt like a piece of a puzzle that had haunted him for 35 years, and with each discovery the terrible picture became clearer. Billy's personal effects painted the portrait of a young man who'd been planning for the future, not running away to die. A bus ticket stub dated 3 days after his disappearance. A return ticket to Knoxville that he'd never used. A small notebook filled with careful handwriting that made Sam's blood run cold as he read the entries by lamplight in his cabin. "Margaret's been asking too many questions about the insurance policies," one entry read. "Found her going through Sam's desk drawers when she thought nobody was looking. Something's not right about this whole setup." Another entry, dated the day before Billy disappeared. "Followed her to the bank today. She's been taking out cash advances on credit cards Sam doesn't know about, large amounts. Whatever she's planning, it's going to cost money." The final entry was the most damning. "Going back to warn Sam tomorrow. Found out she's been seeing Doc Hartley on the side, not for medical reasons. If she's planning what I think she's planning, Sam and little Tommy are in real danger. Insurance money makes for a powerful motive." Sam's hands shook as he read those words. Dr. James Hartley had been the family physician, a trusted friend who delivered Tommy and treated their minor ailments. He'd also been one of the first responders to the fire, the man who'd pronounced Margaret and Tommy dead at the scene, the man who'd comforted Sam in his grief and helped him navigate the insurance claims. But there was more. Hidden in Billy's wallet, behind his driver's license, Sam found a folded piece of paper that made his world tilt on its axis. It was a life insurance application. Not the modest policy Sam remembered signing, but a massive $500,000 policy on his own life, with Margaret as the sole beneficiary. The signature at the bottom looked like his, but Sam had no memory of signing such a document. Liberty sensed his distress and pressed her warm flank against his leg, offering the comfort of her presence. She'd been agitated ever since the excavation began, pacing the cabin at night and refusing to eat. Dogs knew things, Sam remembered his canine instructors saying. They sensed truths that humans missed, picked up on deceptions and dangers that logical minds dismissed. The most devastating discovery came on the 3rd day. Wrapped in an oilcloth deep within the tree's hollow, Billy had hidden a small cassette recorder, the kind journalists used in the 1980s. The device was damaged but functional, and when Sam played the tape on his old radio, his brother's voice filled the cabin with revelations that shattered 30 years of carefully constructed guilt. "If something happens to me," Billy's recorded voice began, "I want someone to know the truth about Margaret Mackenzie. I've been watching her for weeks, and I know what she's planning." The tape revealed a conspiracy that made Sam's stomach churn. Margaret had been systematically poisoning him with small doses of arsenic, enough to make him sick, but not enough to kill quickly. The plan was to weaken him gradually, then stage his death to look like an accident or natural causes. The insurance money would set her up for life with her lover, Dr. Hartley. "She's been putting something in his coffee every morning," Billy's voice continued. "Sam's been getting sicker, losing weight, complaining about headaches and nausea. She tells him it's stress from work, but I've seen her adding powder to his cup when she thinks nobody's looking." But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Margaret hadn't died in the fire that claimed Tommy's life. According to Billy's investigation, she'd planned to fake her own death, disappear with the insurance money, and start a new life. The fire was meant to kill Sam and Tommy, leaving her free to collect the policies and vanish. "She's got it all worked out." Billy's voice grew urgent on the tape. "Hartley's going to pronounce her dead, but there won't be a body to examine. She's planning to slip away during the chaos, let everyone assume she died in the flames. Sam will be the grieving widower for about a week before he has his accident." Sam stopped the tape, unable to process more. His hands trembled as the implications crashed over him like an avalanche. Margaret hadn't loved him. She'd been slowly murdering him. Tommy hadn't died because of Sam's negligence with a cigarette. His son had been murdered by the woman Sam had trusted with their lives. And Billy, brave, impulsive Billy, had died trying to expose the truth and save his family. But if Margaret's death had been staged, if there had been no body found in the fire's aftermath, then she might still be alive. Somewhere out there, the woman who'd killed his brother and his son might be living comfortably on blood money, believing she'd gotten away with the perfect crime. Sam looked at Liberty, who watched him with those intelligent amber eyes that seemed to understand everything. "She might still be out there, girl," he whispered. "After all these years, thinking she won." The dog's low growl suggested she understood more than just his words. Liberty had been trained to detect threats, to sense danger that human senses missed. Her behavior around the tree, her restlessness since the discovery, she'd been trying to warn him that the danger wasn't buried in the past. It was still very much alive. That night, as storm clouds gathered over the mountains and the first cold drops of rain began to fall, Sam made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't let Margaret's crimes remain buried like Billy's bones. Justice might be 30 years late, but it wasn't too late. Tomorrow he would begin the hunt for his brother's killer, and this time he wouldn't be the naive husband who'd trusted too easily. This time he'd be the soldier Billy had died trying to warn. The investigation began at dawn with Sam's first contact to the outside world in over a year. His satellite phone, kept for emergencies, crackled to life as he dialed a number he'd memorized but never thought he'd use. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had served with Sam in Vietnam and now worked Veterans Affairs in Nashville. If anyone could help him navigate the bureaucratic maze of military records and insurance investigations, it would be Rodriguez. "Sam Mackenzie." Rodriguez's gravelly voice carried genuine surprise. "Thought you disappeared into those mountains for good. What's got you calling civilization?" "I need a favor, Rodriguez. A big one. And I need it kept quiet until I know what I'm dealing with." Sam explained the discovery in carefully measured terms, watching Liberty pace the cabin's perimeter like a sentry on high alert. Her military training had fully reasserted itself since finding Billy's remains, and she'd taken to sleeping across the doorway with one ear always cocked toward the forest. Whatever instincts had kept her alive in Afghanistan were now focused on protecting their mountain sanctuary. Rodriguez listened without interruption, his silence growing heavier as Sam detailed Billy's recordings and the insurance discrepancies. When Sam finished, the veteran's response was immediate and grim. "Jesus, Sam. If half of what you're telling me is true, you've been living 30 years under a lie. But here's what worries me. If this Margaret is still alive, And she's been monitoring you all this time. Then making contact with me just painted a target on both our backs. The word sent ice through Sam's veins, but Rodriguez wasn't finished. I'll run the record searches through unofficial channels, but Sam, watch your six out there. If she's been living on blood money for 3 decades, she's not going to let you expose her without a fight. Over the next week, information trickled in through encrypted emails and coded phone calls. Rodriguez's contacts in various agencies began piecing together a picture that made Sam's isolation seem less like cowardice and more like divine protection. The insurance investigation revealed that Margaret's death had never been officially confirmed. No body had been recovered from the fire, and the death certificate had been signed by Dr. Hartley based solely on witness testimony. More disturbing was the financial trail. The insurance payouts had been collected by a law firm in Atlanta, then immediately transferred to offshore accounts that disappeared into a labyrinth of shell companies. Someone with sophisticated knowledge of money laundering had orchestrated Margaret's disappearance and profited handsomely from it. But it was the medical records that provided the most chilling revelation. Rodriguez's contact at the Veterans Administration had accessed Sam's old military medical files and cross-referenced them with hospital records from the night of the fire. Sam's blood work from that evening showed elevated levels of arsenic, enough to cause the disorientation and weakness that had made him unable to save his family. "You weren't negligent, Sam." Rodriguez's voice was tight with controlled anger during their nightly check-in. "You were being poisoned, systematically. The levels in your blood that night would have left you barely functional. It's a miracle you survived the fire at all." The truth should have brought relief, but Sam found himself consumed by a different kind of rage. For 30 years he'd carried the guilt of failing his family. He'd exiled himself to these mountains, convinced he deserved nothing but isolation and self-recrimination. Meanwhile, the real killer had been living freely, probably laughing at how perfectly her plan had worked. Liberty sensed his growing anger and pressed closer during their evening walks, her warm presence a reminder that some loyalties transcended betrayal. She'd been abandoned, too. By Jake Morrison's death, by a system that had no place for damaged soldiers, whether human or canine. But she'd chosen to trust again, to build something new from the wreckage of what was lost. On the 8th day of his investigation, Sam's careful isolation was shattered by the sound of a vehicle approaching his cabin. Liberty's hackles rose as she positioned herself between Sam and the front door, her low growl indicating the approaching visitors weren't welcome. Through the window, Sam watched a black SUV with tinted windows navigate the rutted mountain road that led to his property. The vehicle stopped 50 yards from the cabin, and 2 figures emerged. Even at that distance, Sam's military-trained eyes cataloged details. Both men moved with the practiced caution of professionals. Their positions flanking the vehicle suggested tactical awareness, and the bulges beneath their jackets indicated concealed weapons. "Federal agents," Sam murmured to Liberty, though something about their approach felt wrong. Real federal agents would have announced themselves, would have followed protocol for approaching an isolated residence. These men moved like hunters stalking prey. One of the men called out across the clearing, his voice carrying false authority. "Samuel Mackenzie, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you about some evidence you may have discovered." Sam's blood chilled. He'd been careful about his communications with Rodriguez, using military codes and encryption protocols. But somehow, someone had learned about his investigation. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Liberty's growl deepened as the men began approaching the cabin. Her ears lay flat against her skull, and Sam recognized the signs of a dog preparing for combat. In Afghanistan, this posture had preceded her attacks on insurgents who'd threatened her handler. She was reading something in these men's body language that confirmed Sam's growing suspicions. Moving with the silent efficiency his military training had drilled into him, Sam gathered Billy's evidence and secured it in the hidden compartment he'd built beneath the cabin's floorboards. The recordings, the insurance documents, the photographs, everything that proved Margaret's guilt disappeared into a space designed to survive even if the cabin burned. "Mr. Mackenzie!" The voice was closer now, more insistent. "We know you've been in contact with government agencies. We're here to help." The lie was so transparent it would have been laughable under other circumstances. Real federal agents would have proper identification, would have followed chain of command protocols, would have arrived during business hours with warrants and paperwork. These men had come at dusk, unannounced, to an isolated location where witnesses would be non-existent. Sam checked his rifle, a Winchester Model 70 that had served him faithfully for decades of hunting in these mountains. Liberty positioned herself at the window, every muscle tense with anticipation. Together, they waited as the footsteps circled the cabin, probing for weaknesses. The first shot shattered the kitchen window, spraying glass across the floor where Sam had been standing moments before. Liberty's training kicked in immediately. She dropped low and moved to the back of the cabin, away from the gunfire, but positioned to attack if the shooters breached the building. "Last chance, Mackenzie!" one of the attackers shouted. "Give us the evidence and we'll make this quick." Sam's response was a carefully aimed shot through the front door that sent both men diving for cover behind their vehicle. The message was clear. This old mountain man wasn't going quietly. The siege lasted through the night. The attackers made several attempts to approach the cabin, but Sam's knowledge of the terrain and Liberty's early warning system gave them decisive advantages. Every shadow that moved wrong, every twig that snapped under an unwary foot, Liberty detected and alerted him to with silent efficiency. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson, the attackers finally withdrew. Their retreat was orderly and professional. These weren't desperate criminals, but skilled operatives who'd underestimated their target and decided to regroup rather than risk further casualties. Sam watched their SUV disappear down the mountain road, knowing this was far from over. Margaret, or whoever was protecting her, had resources he'd only begun to understand. The attack confirmed his worst fears. She was not only alive but powerful enough to command professional killers. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd threatened Liberty, and that transformed this from a quest for justice into something far more personal. Sam Mackenzie might have been content to live quietly with his guilt, but nobody threatened his dog and walked away. As he surveyed the damage to his cabin and began planning his next move, Sam felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years. Purpose. The scared, guilt-ridden man who'd fled to these mountains was gone, replaced by the soldier Billy had died trying to save. The hunt was about to begin in earnest. The counterattack came with the precision of a military operation, but Sam was ready. 3 days after the failed assault on his cabin, he and Liberty had relocated to a defensive position Rodriguez had suggested, an abandoned fire lookout tower that provided commanding views of the surrounding valleys and multiple escape routes through terrain only locals would know. Liberty's training proved invaluable during the relocation. Her ability to detect human scent from remarkable distances gave them early warning of surveillance attempts, while her silent movement through the forest allowed them to avoid the search teams that combed the mountains looking for them. They moved only at night, using game trails and creek beds to mask their passage, living off cached supplies Sam had hidden throughout his territory over the years. From their elevated position, Sam watched through military-grade binoculars as teams of men in tactical gear systematically searched his abandoned cabin and the surrounding area. These weren't local law enforcement. Their equipment was too sophisticated, their coordination too professional. Someone with serious resources wanted him silenced, which meant his investigation had struck closer to home than he'd realized. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the encrypted radio during their nightly check-in, bringing news that made Sam's blood run cold. "Your friend, Dr. Hartley," Rodriguez reported, "died in a car accident 3 months after your family's fire. Brake failure on a mountain road. Very convenient timing for someone who didn't want to share secrets." The pattern was becoming clear. Margaret hadn't just faked her death and stolen insurance money. She'd systematically eliminated everyone who could expose her crime. Billy had been first, then Hartley, and now Sam represented the final loose end in a conspiracy that had operated successfully for 3 decades. But Rodriguez had more disturbing news. "The men who hit your cabin weren't freelancers, Sam. I ran their vehicle registration through some contacts. That SUV was registered to a private security firm with government contracts. Somebody with serious pull is protecting your wife." "Ex-wife," Sam corrected grimly. "And she's been dead to me for 30 years. Question is, who's been keeping her alive?" The answer came the next morning in a form that shattered Sam's world completely. Liberty's sharp bark alerted him to movement in the valley below, and through his binoculars, Sam watched a familiar figure emerge from a black sedan. Even at distance, even after 30 years, he recognized the confident stride and auburn hair of the woman who'd once shared his bed and murdered his family. Margaret looked older but well-preserved, her clothing expensive and her bearing confident. She moved like someone accustomed to power, accompanied by men who deferred to her authority. This wasn't a woman hiding in fear of discovery. This was someone who'd built a new life on the foundation of her crimes and had no intention of surrendering it. But it was the figure who emerged from the passenger seat that stopped Sam's heart completely. A tall man in his 30s with familiar pale blue eyes and the stubborn Mackenzie jawline, Tommy. His son, who'd supposedly died in the fire 30 years ago, was alive and standing beside the woman who'd murdered his uncle. Sam's hands shook so violently he could barely hold the binoculars. Tommy was alive. His boy, who would be 38 now, had grown into a man Sam had never known. The grief he'd carried for 3 decades, the guilt that had driven him into exile, had been built on another of Margaret's lies. Through the magnified lenses, Sam watched mother and son conference with their security team, pointing toward the mountains where they knew he was hiding. Tommy moved with authority, clearly integral to whatever operation they were running. His survival wasn't accidental, it was part of Margaret's plan, though Sam couldn't yet understand what role his son played in the conspiracy. Liberty sensed his emotional devastation and pressed against his leg, offering the comfort of her warm presence. Her amber eyes watched the figures in the valley with professional alertness, cataloging threats and escape routes with the efficiency that had kept her alive in combat zones. She understood they were surrounded by enemies, but she also understood that Sam needed her strength now more than ever. The radio crackled with Rodriguez's urgent voice. "Sam, you need to get out of there now. My sources say they've got satellite surveillance on your position." "Whatever you're planning, they're already 3 steps ahead." But Sam couldn't move. Below in the valley, Tommy was studying a map spread across the hood of their vehicle, directing search teams with the competence of someone who'd done this before. His son, his supposedly dead son, was actively hunting him like a criminal. "How long have you known?" Sam whispered into the radio. "Known what?" Rodriguez replied, though his tone suggested he understood the question. "How long have you known Tommy was alive?" The silence stretched for long seconds before Rodriguez answered, his voice heavy with regret. "We suspected for the last 72 hours. Facial recognition software flagged him during our background searches. Sam, I wanted to tell you, but we needed confirmation." "He's working with her," Sam interrupted, watching through the binoculars as Tommy coordinated the search teams with military precision. My son is helping the woman who killed his uncle hunt me down like an animal." The betrayal cut deeper than Margaret's original deception. He could understand how a young woman might be corrupted by greed and desperation. But Tommy had been 8 years old when the fire happened, an innocent child who should have grown up knowing right from wrong. Instead, Margaret had shaped him into something Sam didn't recognize. Liberty's low growl drew his attention back to immediate threats. Through her superior senses, she'd detected movement that his human eyes had missed. Search teams were ascending the mountain from 3 different directions, moving with tactical precision that suggested professional military training. The net was closing around their position with methodical efficiency. Sam made a decision that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. He couldn't fight his own son, couldn't risk Tommy's life, even if the young man was actively trying to capture him. But he also couldn't surrender without ensuring that Billy's evidence reached the right people. The truth about Margaret's crimes had to survive, even if he didn't. Working quickly, Sam uploaded Billy's recordings and documents to Rodriguez's secure server, transmitting 35 years of buried evidence across encrypted channels that would preserve the truth regardless of what happened on this mountain. Liberty watched the perimeter while he worked, her professional alertness never wavering despite the emotional chaos surrounding them. "Package delivered," Sam reported into the radio. "Whatever happens next, make sure Billy gets justice." "Sam, don't do anything stupid." Rodriguez's voice carried genuine alarm. "There are other ways to handle this. Federal protection, witness relocation." "Not from this," Sam replied, watching Tommy's team advance up the mountain with inexorable precision. "This isn't about justice anymore, Rodriguez. This is about family. And family doesn't run from family, no matter how twisted things have become." Liberty's ears pricked forward as the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the valley. Reinforcements were arriving, more men, more equipment, more resources devoted to silencing the old soldier who'd stumbled across inconvenient truths. The woman who'd once whispered promises of love in his ear was now orchestrating his destruction with the same methodical planning she'd used to murder Billy. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She'd brought Tommy into direct confrontation with the father he'd been taught to believe was dead. Whatever lies she'd told him about the past, whatever version of history she'd constructed to justify her actions, would crumble when father and son faced each other across the battlefield she'd created. Sam checked his rifle one final time and looked into Liberty's intelligent eyes. "Ready for one last mission, girl?" Her tail wagged once, a soldier's acknowledgement of orders received and understood. Together, they would face whatever came next with the same courage that had carried them through previous battles. The truth was now beyond Margaret's reach, preserved in digital files that would outlive whatever happened on this mountain. Justice for Billy was no longer dependent on Sam's survival, but the reunion with Tommy, the son he'd mourned for 30 years, that was worth any risk. The final confrontation was about to begin. The confrontation began at dawn with the crack of a sniper's rifle that shattered the morning silence. The bullet splintered the wooden railing inches from where Sam crouched behind the fire tower's observation deck, sending fragments of ancient timber spinning into the valley below. Liberty's immediate response was pure military instinct. She dropped flat against the deck planking and began scanning for threats with the focused intensity that had kept her alive through multiple combat deployments. "Federal agents!" Tommy's voice echoed across the mountainside, amplified by a megaphone that carried the authority of official law enforcement. "Samuel Mackenzie, you're surrounded. Come down with your hands visible and no one gets hurt." The irony wasn't lost on Sam. His own son was using the same tactical procedures Sam had taught recruits 30 years ago, the same voice commands and positioning strategies that had been drilled into every soldier who'd served under him. Tommy moved his teams with professional competence, establishing overlapping fields of fire and cutting off escape routes with methodical precision. But it was Margaret's voice that followed Tommy's announcement, carried on the same megaphone with chilling maternal authority. "Samuel, you've caused enough trouble for this family. Come down now and we can discuss this like civilized people. No one wants anyone to get hurt." Family. The word tasted like poison in Sam's mouth. This woman who'd murdered Billy, poisoned Sam himself, and faked her own death was still calling them family. She'd spent 30 years building a new life on the foundation of her crimes, and now she stood in the valley below surrounded by armed men, offering negotiation as if her betrayal was a simple misunderstanding. Through his rifle scope, Sam could see her clearly for the first time in 3 decades. Margaret had aged gracefully, her auburn hair now silver but still styled with the vanity he remembered. And she wore expensive clothing that spoke of comfortable wealth, blood money well invested. Most disturbing was her bearing, confident, authoritative, completely unrepentant. This wasn't a woman haunted by guilt over her crimes. This was someone who'd convinced herself that murder and betrayal were justified business decisions. Tommy stood beside her with the rigid posture of a career military officer, his tactical gear-bearing insignia Sam didn't recognize. Whatever unit his son served with, it wasn't regular army. The specialized equipment, the sophisticated coordination, the resources devoted to silencing one old mountain man, this operation had government backing at levels that made Rodriguez's warning seem understated. "Dad!" Tommy's voice cracked slightly on the word, the first sign of emotion breaking through his professional demeanor. "I know you're up there. I know what you think you've discovered, but you don't understand the whole picture." "Come down so we can explain." The word "Dad" hit Sam like a physical blow. For 30 years he'd mourned this boy, had carried the guilt of failing to save him from the fire. Now Tommy was alive, grown into a man Sam didn't recognize, and actively hunting him under Margaret's command. The grief of losing his son had been replaced by something worse, the knowledge that his son had been turned against him by the woman who'd destroyed their family. Liberty's low growl alerted Sam to movement on his left flank. Through the scope, he spotted 2 tactical teams ascending the mountain from different directions, using the terrain and tree cover to mask their approach. They moved with the fluid coordination of special operations units, not the heavy-handed tactics of regular law enforcement. Someone had committed serious resources to this operation. "Rodriguez was right," Sam whispered into his radio. "This isn't about covering up old crimes anymore. This is about protecting something bigger." The radio crackled with his old friend's voice, tight with concern. "Sam, we've been monitoring government frequencies. They've got authorization for lethal force if you resist. Whatever Margaret's involved in now, it's got official protection at the highest levels." Understanding crashed over Sam like a cold wave. Margaret hadn't just stolen insurance money and disappeared, she'd parlayed her crimes into something much larger. The sophisticated operation below, the government resources, Tommy's specialized unit, she'd built a new criminal empire on the foundation of Billy's murder. And that empire now had official sanction. But why bring Tommy into direct confrontation? Why risk exposing her carefully constructed lies to the son she'd spent 30 years manipulating? Unless... Sam's blood chilled as the truth became clear. This wasn't about silencing him. This was about proving Tommy's loyalty. Margaret needed to know that when forced to choose between his manipulative mother and his supposedly dead father, Tommy would choose her. This entire operation was a test, and Sam was the unwilling subject. "Tommy!" Sam called out, his voice carrying across the mountainside without the aid of electronics. "She killed your Uncle Billy. I found his body in the old chestnut tree. She murdered him because he tried to warn me about her." The tactical teams below froze at his words, and Sam could see Tommy's rigid posture waver slightly. Through the scope, he watched his son turn toward Margaret with what might have been confusion or doubt. For a moment, the professional soldier facade cracked, revealing the 8-year-old boy who'd once built tree forts and caught fireflies in mason jars. Margaret's response was swift and decisive. Her voice cut through the mountain air with maternal authority. "Don't listen to him, Thomas. Your father has been living alone in these mountains for 30 years. Isolation does things to a man's mind. He's not thinking clearly. She poisoned me the night of the fire," Sam continued, desperation driving him to revelation. "I didn't leave that cigarette burning by accident. She drugged my coffee so I'd be too weak to save you. She planned to kill both of us and collect the insurance money." This time, Tommy's reaction was unmistakable. He stepped away from Margaret, his weapon lowering slightly as doubt clouded his features. The other tactical team members looked to him for guidance, but Tommy seemed frozen between competing loyalties. 30 years of lies, son." Sam's voice broke with emotion. "She told you I abandoned you, didn't she? That I ran away after the fire. She's been feeding you poison for 3 decades, just like she fed it to me." Margaret's mask finally slipped. Her voice lost its maternal warmth, becoming cold and calculating. "Thomas, you have your orders. Take the shot." The words hung in the mountain air like a death sentence. Margaret had just ordered her own son to murder his father, and the casual way she delivered the command revealed the depth of her corruption. This wasn't maternal protection. This was the final test of a soldier's loyalty to his commanding officer. Tommy raised his rifle with mechanical precision, the scope finding Sam's position on the fire tower. Through his own scope, Sam could see his son's face. No longer the confident officer, but a young man torn between duty and dawning recognition of truth. The crosshairs steadied on Sam's chest, and for a moment that stretched like eternity, father and son faced each other across the battlefield Margaret had created. Liberty sensed the moment's gravity and pressed against Sam's leg, her warm presence a reminder of loyalty that transcended manipulation and lies. She'd lost her original handler to war, had been betrayed by systems that should have protected her, but she'd chosen to trust again. Now she stood ready to defend the man who'd given her a second chance at purpose. "I forgive you, son," Sam whispered, knowing the radio might carry his words to the valley below. "Whatever she told you, whatever she made you believe, I forgive you. You were just a child. You couldn't have known." The rifle shot that followed echoed across the mountains like thunder, the sound bouncing off stone faces and rolling through valleys that had witnessed a century of human tragedy. Birds erupted from trees in panicked clouds, and the sudden silence that followed seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would fall and who would stand. When the gun smoke cleared, Sam was still alive. But in the valley below, Margaret lay motionless beside her vehicle, a spreading pool of crimson staining the mountain earth. Tommy stood over her body, his smoking rifle pointed skyward, tears streaming down his face as 30 years of lies crumbled around him. The son had chosen truth over manipulation, love over duty, and justice over the woman who'd stolen his childhood and corrupted his loyalty. Margaret's final test had failed catastrophically, and her death marked the end of a conspiracy that had poisoned 3 generations of the Mackenzie family. But the cost of that justice was about to become clear. The aftermath of Margaret's death brought chaos that Sam hadn't anticipated. As her body lay cooling in the mountain earth, the tactical teams below erupted into confusion. Without their commanding officer's orders, the specialized units found themselves in an unprecedented situation. Their mission parameters had just been fundamentally altered by the person who'd authorized the operation. Tommy stood over his mother's corpse, his rifle still smoking, tears streaming down his face as 30 years of carefully constructed lies crumbled around him. The professional soldier's composure had shattered completely, replaced by the grief of a man discovering that his entire life had been built on deception and murder. Through his scope, Sam watched his son's shoulders shake with sobs that echoed across the mountainside. "All units, stand down!" Tommy's voice cracked as he spoke into his radio. "Mission parameters have changed." Repeat. All units stand down immediately. The tactical teams looked to each other with obvious confusion. Their chain of command had just killed their commanding officer, and protocol provided no guidance for such a scenario. Some began withdrawing toward their vehicles, while others maintained defensive positions, unsure whether the operation was continuing under new leadership or being aborted entirely. Liberty sensed the shift in dynamics and relaxed slightly from her combat posture, though her amber eyes remained alert to potential threats. Her military training had taught her to recognize when battles were won, but also to remain vigilant for new dangers that might emerge from victory's aftermath. "Tommy!" Sam called across the valley, his voice carrying the gentle authority of a father rather than the tactical commands of a soldier. "Son, I'm coming down. Don't let your men shoot me." The descent from the fire tower felt like traveling through 30 years of compressed time. Each step brought Sam closer to the son he'd mourned, the boy who'd grown into a man under the influence of the woman who'd destroyed their family. Liberty followed close beside him, her protective instincts focused on the reunion ahead rather than the armed men who still surrounded the area. When Sam reached the valley floor, Tommy stood waiting beside Margaret's body, his tactical gear incongruous with the tears that continued to stream down his weathered face. Up close, the family resemblance was unmistakable. The same pale blue eyes, the same stubborn Mackenzie jawline, even the same way of holding his shoulders when facing difficult truths. "She told me you abandoned us," Tommy said, his voice hollow with devastation. "She said you ran away after the fire because you couldn't face what you'd done. For 30 years I believed you were a coward who chose saving himself over saving his family." Sam's heart broke at the pain in his son's voice. "I thought you were dead, Tommy. I carried that guilt for 30 years. She told me you died in the fire, and I believed her. I've been living in exile, thinking I'd failed to save you." "The fire wasn't an accident, was it?" Tommy gestured toward Margaret's body. "What she said about the insurance, about Uncle Billy, it was all real?" "Billy tried to warn me," Sam confirmed, his voice heavy with regret. "He discovered she was poisoning me, planning to kill us both for the insurance money. She murdered him to keep him quiet, then staged the fire to eliminate the witnesses. But something went wrong with her plan." Tommy's laugh was bitter and broken. "I was supposed to die in that fire. She saved me, raised me, made me believe she was protecting me from a father who'd abandoned his responsibilities. And all along she was the one who'd tried to murder me." The revelation hung between them like a physical presence. Sam wanted to reach out to embrace the son he'd lost, but 30 years of separation and manipulation couldn't be bridged with simple gestures. Tommy had been shaped by Margaret's lies, trained to see Sam as the enemy, and rebuilding trust would require more than shared genetics. "What happens now?" Tommy asked, looking around at the tactical teams who waited for new orders. "This operation was classified, authorized at levels I can't even discuss. Margaret wasn't just some insurance fraud criminal. She'd built connections, relationships, power structures that reach into places you can't imagine." Sam understood the implications. Margaret's death wouldn't end the conspiracy she'd built. It would only create a power vacuum that others would rush to fill. The men surrounding them weren't just tactical support. They were evidence of a criminal organization with government protection, and that organization would need to eliminate witnesses to survive. Rodriguez, Sam spoke into his radio. We need extraction. Now. The situation here is about to get very complicated. His old friend's response was immediate and grim. Already en route, Sam. Federal marshals are 20 minutes out, along with FBI units that aren't compromised. But you need to know. We've intercepted communications suggesting this isn't over. Margaret was part of something bigger. The sound of approaching helicopters echoed across the valley, but they weren't coming from the direction Rodriguez had indicated. These aircraft bore military markings and moved with the aggressive purpose of combat units rather than law enforcement. Someone had decided that the entire situation needed to be contained permanently. Dad? Tommy's use of the word carried weight that 30 years couldn't diminish. We need to get out of here. Now. Those aren't rescue helicopters. The next few minutes became a blur of tactical movement as Tommy's specialized training took over. He barked orders to his confused teams, separating those loyal to him personally from those who'd followed Margaret's commands. The division revealed the depth of the conspiracy. Nearly half the tactical units refused Tommy's authority and began positioning for what looked like a final assault. Liberty's hackles rose as she sensed the approaching violence. Her combat instincts, honed through multiple deployments, recognized the signs of impending battle. She positioned herself between Sam and the greatest concentration of hostile forces, her military training overriding any consideration of personal safety. She's old, Sam said, watching Liberty prepare for what might be her final fight. 9 years old, and she's already given more than any soldier should have to give. This isn't her battle anymore. Every battle is her battle, Tommy replied, checking his weapon with professional efficiency. Just like every battle was yours in Vietnam. And every battle has been mine since she recruited me into this nightmare. We don't get to choose which fights matter. We just get to choose how we face them. The wisdom in his son's words reminded Sam of the man Tommy had become despite Margaret's manipulation. Underneath the corruption and lies, the fundamental character Sam and his first wife had tried to instill in their son had somehow survived. The boy who'd once helped injured animals and defended smaller children from bullies had grown into a man capable of killing the woman who'd raised him when justice demanded it. The first shots from the approaching helicopters sent all three of them diving for cover behind the vehicles. Liberty's response was immediate and professional. She identified the direction of incoming fire and began providing tactical alerts with the same efficiency she'd shown in Afghanistan. Age might have slowed her reflexes, but it hadn't diminished her courage or commitment. There's a drainage tunnel about 200 yards north, Tommy shouted over the gunfire. It leads to an old mining complex that connects to the main highway. If we can reach it before they establish a perimeter. A rifle bullet shattered the windshield above Sam's head, sending glass fragments raining down on their position. The hostile forces had them pinned down with overlapping fields of fire, and the approaching helicopters would soon eliminate any chance of escape. But Liberty had other ideas. With a courage that humbled both men, the aging German shepherd broke from cover and charged toward the nearest hostile position. Her attack wasn't the wild aggression of a frightened animal. It was the calculated assault of a professional soldier drawing fire away from her unit. "Liberty, no!" Sam's cry echoed across the battlefield, but the dog was already committed to her charge. She moved with the fluid grace of her military training, using terrain and cover to maximize her effectiveness while minimizing exposure. For a few crucial seconds, her assault disrupted the hostile fire pattern enough for Sam and Tommy to advance toward the drainage tunnel. The bullet that took Liberty down came from one of the helicopters, a sniper's shot that sent her tumbling across the rocky ground. She tried to rise, to continue her assault, but her strength was finally failing. The warrior who'd survived Afghanistan, who'd lost one handler to war and found another to love, was making her final sacrifice. Sam's roar of grief and rage carried across the mountainside as he abandoned cover and ran toward his fallen companion. and 30 years of guilt, isolation, and self-recrimination transformed into pure fury at seeing the one creature who'd given him unconditional love struck down by the remnants of Margaret's conspiracy. Tommy followed his father's charge, laying down covering fire with professional precision. For the first time in 30 years, father and son fought side by side, united by love for the dog who'd bridged the gap between them. When Sam reached Liberty's position, she was still alive but failing fast. Her amber eyes found his face, and her tail managed one weak wag, a final affirmation of the bond they'd shared through years of healing and hope. "I'm sorry, girl," Sam whispered, cradling her graying head in his hands. "I'm so sorry." Liberty's response was to lick his face once gently before her eyes closed for the final time. The warrior's last act was to comfort the man she'd chosen to love and protect. The grief that followed was beyond tears, beyond words, beyond anything Sam had experienced even during his darkest years of exile. Liberty hadn't just been his companion, she'd been his salvation, his reason for living, his proof that loyalty and love could survive even the worst betrayals. But her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Tommy's covering fire had eliminated the immediate threats, and the approaching federal units Rodriguez had promised were finally arriving in force. The sound of legitimate law enforcement operations, proper protocols, official communications, lawful authority, began to overwhelm the chaos Margaret's conspiracy had created. As Sam held Liberty's still form and watched his son coordinate with federal agents to secure the area, he realized that her final mission had been successful. She'd brought father and son together, had given them the chance to fight side by side, and had ensured that Margaret's 30-year reign of terror would finally end. The truth about Billy's murder, about Margaret's crimes, about the conspiracy that had protected her, all of it would now see daylight. Justice would finally be served, though it had cost more than Sam had ever imagined possible. Liberty was gone, but her legacy would live on in the family she'd helped rebuild, and the truth she'd died protecting. 6 months after Liberty's sacrifice on that blood-soaked mountainside, Sam Mackenzie stood in the morning sunlight outside the federal courthouse in Knoxville, watching the last of Margaret's co-conspirators being led away in shackles. The investigation that had grown from Billy's bones and Liberty's courage had unraveled a corruption network that reached into 3 states and involved over 24 officials in various law enforcement and government agencies. The woman he'd once called wife had built her criminal empire methodically, using Billy's murder as the foundation for decades of insurance fraud, money laundering, and systematic elimination of witnesses. Dr. Hartley had been only the first of 7 people she'd killed to protect her secrets. Each death had been carefully staged to look accidental, and each had strengthened her position within a network that traded government protection for criminal profits. Tommy stood beside his father on the courthouse steps, his own legal troubles finally resolved. The federal prosecutors had recognized him as another of Margaret's victims, a child soldier molded by years of manipulation and lies. His cooperation in unraveling the conspiracy had earned him immunity, though Sam knew his son would carry the weight of those revelations for the rest of his life. "She had me convinced you were the monster," Tommy said quietly, watching the news crews pack up their equipment. "For 30 years, I believed you'd abandoned your family, that you were a coward who ran when things got difficult. She made me hate you before I even knew you." Sam's weathered hand found his son's shoulder. "Hate's too heavy a burden to carry, son. I learned that in these mountains, living with guilt that wasn't even mine to bear. What matters now is the truth, and the chance to build something real between us." The truth had indeed set them free, though the price had been higher than Sam had ever imagined. Liberty's grave in the mountain cemetery bore a simple headstone: Liberty Mackenzie, loyal soldier, faithful friend, bridge builder. The German Shepherd, who'd detected bombs in Afghanistan, had performed her most important mission in the Tennessee mountains, using her final moments to reunite a family that corruption had torn apart. Rodriguez appeared at Sam's elbow, his own relief evident after months of careful maneuvering through federal bureaucracies and competing jurisdictions. "The last of the insurance money's been recovered," he reported. "Justice Department says you're entitled to restitution, Sam, enough to live comfortably for whatever years you've got left." But Sam had already made his decision about the money. "Set up a trust fund," he told Rodriguez, "for K-9 veterans and their handlers." Liberty would want other soldiers to get the second chances she gave me." The drive back to the mountains passed in contemplative silence. Tommy had taken leave from his military duties, legitimate duties this time, with a special forces unit that had no connection to his mother's crimes. He'd asked to spend time learning about the father he'd never known, to understand the man Margaret had taught him to despise. The cabin Sam had abandoned during the siege remained uninhabitable, its walls riddled with bullet holes and its memories too painful to restore. Instead, they'd built something new on a different ridge, a larger structure designed to accommodate the family Sam had never expected to regain. Tommy's fiancée, Sarah, had embraced the reunion with the same grace she'd shown in accepting her future husband's complicated past. The new cabin's porch faced east toward the ancient chestnut tree where Billy's remains had finally been laid to rest. The tree itself had surprised everyone by surviving the excavation, its massive trunk healing around the cavity that had hidden 35 years of family secrets. New growth emerged from the scarred bark each spring, a testament to nature's capacity for renewal even after profound trauma. "I want to show you something," Tommy said as they reached the cabin. He led Sam to the workshop behind the main building, where wood shavings and the scent of pine oil spoke of careful craftsmanship. On the workbench sat a hand-carved wooden box, its surface polished to a warm glow and inlaid with brass fittings. "I've been working on this for months," Tommy explained, opening the box to reveal Liberty's collar, her military service medals, and a photograph of her with Sam taken during their peaceful years in the mountains. She deserved better than a simple headstone. Sam's hands trembled as he lifted Liberty's collar, remembering the morning she'd first worn it, a rescued soldier, learning to trust again, finding purpose in protecting the old man who'd given her sanctuary. The leather was worn soft with years of mountain adventures, marked with the character that came from a life well lived. "She saved us all," Sam said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just from Margaret's conspiracy, but from the isolation and guilt that was killing us both. She taught me that family isn't just about blood, it's about choosing to love someone and standing by that choice no matter what." The memorial box found its place on the cabin's mantelpiece, positioned where morning sunlight would illuminate Liberty's photograph through the windows she'd once guarded so vigilantly. Beside it sat Billy's own memorial, the cassette recorder that had preserved his warnings, finally heard after 35 years of silence. As autumn returned to the mountains, bringing the same golden light that had illuminated Sam's first morning with Liberty, the Mackenzie family gathered for Sunday dinner on the new cabin's porch. Tommy and Sarah had married in a simple ceremony beside the chestnut tree, with Rodriguez serving as best man and an honor guard of K-9 veterans providing military tribute to Liberty's memory. The conversation around the dinner table spoke of healing that seemed impossible only months before. Sarah's gentle questions helped Tommy process his complicated childhood, while her pregnancy brought promise of new life to a family that had known too much death. The baby would be named William for the uncle who'd died trying to protect his family, with Liberty as a middle name for the dog who'd completed that protection decades later. "I keep expecting her to come around the corner," Tommy admitted, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. 9 years with her was too short. All the years we get are too short, Sam replied, thinking of Liberty's gray muzzle and the way she'd slowed down in her final months. What matters is how we spend them and who we choose to spend them with. The memorial trust Rodriguez had established was already funding its first projects. K-9 veterans across the country were receiving medical care, training support, and adoption assistance that would give them the second chances Liberty had found in these mountains. Each success story carried forward her legacy of loyalty and courage. As darkness settled over the valley and the first stars appeared above the peaks, Sam found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The discovery of Billy's remains had felt like the end of the world, the destruction of everything he'd believed about his life. Instead, it had become the beginning of redemption, for himself, for Tommy, and for the truth that had waited 35 years to see daylight. "She's still here, you know," Sarah said softly, her hand resting on the gentle swell of pregnancy. "Liberty, in the choices we make, the love we show each other, the way we protect what matters. That's how soldiers really achieve immortality." A cool mountain breeze stirred the pine needles above their heads, carrying the scent of autumn and the promise of winter snows. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, not the lonely sound Sam had once interpreted as warning, but the call of pack to pack, family to family, the eternal song of belonging that echoed through these ancient mountains. Liberty had taught him that home wasn't a place you found. It was something you built with the people and creatures you chose to love. The cabin around them, the family at the table, the trust fund helping other veterans, all of it was part of the structure she'd helped them create from the wreckage of Margaret's betrayal. As they prepared for bed that night, Sam paused at Liberty's memorial box and whispered the words he'd never had the chance to say goodbye. "Thank you, girl, for everything. Rest easy now. We've got watch." The mountains settled into their evening quiet, peaceful at last. The secrets that had poisoned 3 generations of the Mackenzie family had finally been laid to rest, and in their place grew something stronger, love that transcended species, loyalty that survived betrayal, and hope that proved even the deepest wounds could heal, given time and courage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to honor Liberty's memory through service to others. But tonight the Mackenzie family was whole again, and that was enough. Some trees grew on blood, Sam reflected as sleep took him. But this one had learned to grow on love instead. Friends, Sam Mackenzie's story reminds us that it's never too late for second chances. At 72, Sam discovered that the guilt he'd carried for 30 years wasn't his to bear. The fire that claimed his family wasn't his fault. He'd been systematically poisoned by the very person he trusted most. Like many of us who've reached our golden years, Sam learned that some of our deepest wounds came from lies we believed about ourselves. Liberty, that faithful German shepherd, didn't just detect bombs in Afghanistan. She detected the love Sam still had to give. Together, they proved that loyalty transcends species, that family is defined by choice rather than blood, and that even the oldest trees can heal from the deepest scars. The reunion with his son Tommy, after 30 years of believing the boy was dead, shows us that hope isn't foolish. It's essential. Sam's mountain sanctuary became a place of healing not through isolation, but through the courage to face painful truths and choose love over bitterness. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding life's battles, but from finding the right companions to fight alongside us. What companion, human or animal, has been your liberty in life's difficult moments? Have you ever discovered that guilt you carried for years wasn't truly yours to bear? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.